The EU didn't lose a major war. There's been no market-wide collapse and not a single day we can point to and say that's when it all went wrong. But yet, the continent that invented the modern industrial economy is now watching its own factories turn the lights off and move somewhere else. In May 2026, full-time headcount at BASF's Ludwigshafen site, the largest integrated chemical complex on the planet, fell below 30,000, the lowest since 1954. Volkswagen went one better 5 months earlier, permanently closing a German plant for the first time in its 88-year history. So this isn't a rough patch in a market cycle. The economic model Europe has run since the 1990s has lost 3 things that made it work, and none of them are coming back. So today we're breaking down what that model was, which of its legs have snapped, and what it means for your money as Brussels reaches for the only power it has left. My name is DC, and this is the Coin Bureau. Now let's start with an overview of the original European model. Strip away the flags and the summits, and the idea was actually quite straightforward. Cheap Russian pipeline gas came in at one end, great German engineering sat in the middle, turning that cheap energy into chemicals, cars, machine tools, steel, aluminium, fertilizer, glass, cement, and just about everything else the world actually needs. Then Chinese demand absorbed the output at the other end, and American security paid for the roof over the whole arrangement. Every single leg of that structure was outsourced. Europe kept the design work and the rulebook and rented everything else from somebody who could do it cheaper. And for about 30 years, that was arguably the best trade in the world. Now, I'm not covering this for the sake of nostalgia. I'm covering this because all 3 external legs have failed at the same time. The gas leg went in 2022 when the Russia-Ukraine war began. The Chinese demand leg didn't go away so much as turn around and start selling back. And the security leg, well, that's now a contentious issue in every capital on the continent. This is not a recession we're describing here. A recession is a business having a bad year. What we have in Europe might just be a business model that doesn't work anymore. In early August 2026, the Dutch TTF benchmark, which is the price Europe actually pays for gas, was trading between roughly 50 and 59 euros per megawatt hour. Convert that and you get somewhere between about $16.50 and $21 per 1 million British thermal units, or MMBTU. American Henry Hub gas is currently sitting at $2.80. So Europe is paying something in the region of 5 to 7 times what an American competitor pays. And the price gap is only part of the problem. Pipeline gas travels directly from producer to customer. But liquefied natural gas, or LNG, has to be chilled to minus 162 degrees, loaded onto a specialized ship, carried across an ocean, and converted back into gas when it arrives. Every one of those steps is a cost the pipeline never had, and it puts Europe in a bidding war with Asian buyers for every marginal cargo. Europe lost cheap gas, and now it's competing for basic resources, and the electricity picture is the same. Large industrial consumers in the EU pay roughly 15 to 18 euro cents per kilowatt hour. In the United States, it's around 7 to 8 cents, and in China, somewhere between 6 and 9. Now, if you make software, none of that really matters to you, but if you run a steam cracker, energy is both your utility bill and your raw material. For chemicals, steel, aluminium, fertilizer, glass, and cement, the power price effectively is the cost of goods sold, which means the plant gets built wherever the electron is cheapest, and no amount of labor reform can change that. And what's worse, Germany walked into this with both hands tied. It completed its nuclear phase-out in the same decade it lost access to cheap Russian gas. Between the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine war in February 2022 and March 2026, production in Germany's energy-intensive industries fell 15%. And the Draghi report put Europe's total energy cost disadvantage against the United States at roughly 800 billion euros per year. So then, what does an 800 billion euro handicap actually look like on the ground? Well, it looks like nothing at all, which is the problem. Since January 2024, BASF has eliminated around 7,000 positions worldwide, roughly 2/3 of them in Europe. Ludwigshafen is currently shedding somewhere between 300 and 350 full-time roles per month, and the site has now posted losses for 4 consecutive years. Its new core shift program targets cutting fixed costs in the core business by up to 20% by 2029. Meanwhile, in March 2026, BASF formally opened its 8.7 billion Verbund site in Zhangjiang in southern China. That's the largest single investment in the company's history. 4 square kilometers, more than 30 production units, and a steam cracker capable of 1 million tons of ethylene a year running on 100% renewable power. It's targeted to deliver 4 to 5 billion euros in annual sales by 2030, and it isn't just chemicals, by the way. Evonik, Wacker and Lanxess are all cutting thousands of jobs. EU primary aluminium output has fallen from 4.3 million tons in 2021 to roughly 3.2 million in 2025 and 2026, a contraction of about a quarter, and smelters that go cold very rarely come back. And then, of course, there's the auto sector where things got turned upside down and inside out. Volkswagen is estimated to be running at around 20% cost disadvantage against its rivals, with German plant utilization at roughly 81%. In 2026, under pressure from the Porsche Peach side of the shareholder register, management floated shutting 4 more German sites from the 2030s. Together, those employ over 45,000 people and build around 750,000 vehicles a year. IG Metall and the state of Lower Saxony blocked it in July and August 2026, citing the agreement that rules out closures through 2030. So the plants stay open, but the cost problem remains unsolved, and management still warns that up to 100,000 jobs globally may eventually need to go. Meanwhile, Chinese brands took between 9 and 10.9% of Europe's entire new car market in mid-2026. In the first half of 2026, BYD registered about 174,000 vehicles in Europe, edging even past Tesla's 170,000. And the EU's answer, of course, duties of up to 35% stacked on the standard 10% tariff. And that, by the way, has already been routed around, because those duties only cover pure battery electric vehicles. Chinese brands simply pivoted to plug-in hybrids and took 34% of European PHEV sales in June 2026. Brilliant. BYD is also building a 4 billion plant in Szeged, Hungary, with 300,000 units of annual capacity and series production targeted for the fourth quarter of 2026. Now, once supply chains relocate, the engineers follow, then the tier 1 suppliers follow, then the apprenticeships stop and the whole ecosystem quietly reroutes itself. And there's nothing another strategy paper out of Brussels can do about it. Which brings us to the money. Draghi's report called for an additional 750 to 800 billion euros of investment every single year, roughly 4.4% to 5% of EU GDP, just to close the gap. As of 2026, the European Banking Federation and Oliver Wyman put the required figure at 1.4 trillion euros a year instead. And the actual policy response? A proposed European Competitiveness Fund of 409 billion euros spread across the 7 years from 2028 to 2034. Now, I could probably do a dozen videos on the issues the EU faces, but as it happens, we have a dedicated channel where you can find more deep dives just like this one, the Finance Bureau. That's our dedicated channel for everything macro, markets, politics, and anything that will move your portfolio. You can find the Finance Bureau by simply following the link in the description below or by scanning the QR code on screen. But for the sake of argument, let's look at some of the positives when it comes to Europe, because in all fairness, despite the breakdown in key industries, some European equities have been ripping. As I record this, the Euro Stoxx 50 is up 22% year on year, which actually beats the S&P 500's 20% over the same window. The DAX is up 9.6%. So how do you square record index levels with a story about deindustrialization? Well, Europe does still have some goods. It has deep pools of capital, world-class engineering talent, and companies that are still winning. Boliden expanded its Oda zinc smelter in Norway from 200,000 to 350,000 tons of capacity. BASF's second quarter 2026 EBITDA before special items came in at 2.4 billion euros, up 54% year on year, helped considerably by that new Chinese site. But that's precisely the point. It's the divergence between the index and the real economy on the ground. An index measures the profits of companies that happen to be listed in Europe, not production that happens to occur in Europe. BASF shares are down 25% over 5 years. Volkswagen preferred shares are down 64% over the same period. A financialized market can rise very comfortably while the industrial base shrinks because the shareholders get paid either way. The factory workers in Ludwigshafen and Emden don't. And that distinction is where politics start to break, because growth is the glue keeping everything together. Growth is exactly what let northern creditors and southern debtors argue about deficits without anyone blowing up the entire continent. France is one clear example of this growing issue. Its central government deficit exceeded 107 billion euros in the first half of 2026, running 14% above budget. Interest payments jumped 19% in that same half to 34.5 billion euros. Both S&P and Fitch downgraded France from AA- to A+, stripping its AA status. S&P projects French debt hitting 121% of GDP by 2028. France also lost a net 800 millionaires in 2025. Ouch. Germany's politics, meanwhile, are fragmenting in a different direction altogether. Chancellor Merz's coalition is polling at between 12% and 14% satisfaction, against dissatisfaction as high as 85%. The AfD is polling at a record 29% nationally, now ahead of the CDU, CSU on 21%. In Saxony-Anhalt, ahead of the September 2026 state elections, the AfD is polling 42%, a 20-point lead. Now add in farmer protests across France, Germany and the Netherlands over diesel taxes and compliance costs, North versus South on debt, East versus West on migration and defense, and anyone can plainly see how fragmented Europe has become. There is very little institutional capacity to fix the model and an enormous amount of capacity to argue about who pays for its decline. So when an economy stops being able to create value, policy shifts to supervising it instead. And you can watch that develop in real time in just how Europe treats money. Under the EU's anti-money laundering regulation, a block-wide €10,000 ceiling on cash payments becomes directly applicable across all 27 member states on the 10th of July 2027. That's a ceiling, not a floor, and plenty of countries are already stricter. France caps resident cash payments at €1,000. The Netherlands banned cash purchases above €3,000 from the 1st of January 2026. In June 2026, MEP Marcus Ferber accepted a petition against the framework, carrying over 350,000 signatures. And then, of course, there's the digital euro. Trilogues formally began on the 13th of July 2026, with political agreement targeted by year-end and a first issuance penciled in for 2029. The ECB has selected 36 payment providers for a pilot and is spending an estimated €265 million on infrastructure, with a per-person holding limit of around €3,000 currently under discussion. The ECB insists there will be no hard programmability, no expiry dates, no restricted merchant categories, and so on. But the capability is all there. So the ECB's official position is open to interpretation. And on crypto specifically, MiCA's transitional window closed on the 1st of July 2026. Tether declined to seek authorization, so USDT lost its route onto regulated European venues entirely, with Binance, Coinbase, Kraken, OKX and Revolut all stripping access for EEA users. Europe's register of licensed crypto firms has gone from over 3,000 legacy entities down to roughly 321 authorized crypto asset service providers. CASPs. So what happens when a currency zone looks less competitive and more restrictive at the same time? Well, roughly 99% of all fiat-backed stablecoin value globally is pegged to the US dollar, in a market worth around $320 billion. Euro-denominated stablecoins, after growing from about €50 million 2 years ago to €450 million in January 2026 and toward $900 million by mid-year, are still just a drop in the ocean in comparison. In early 2024, the Euro token, EURE, accounted for around 88% of crypto card spending in Europe. By July 2026, that share had collapsed to 2%, while dollar tokens took 84%, with USDC on 58% and USDT on 26%, across monthly volumes that had risen 2.5 times to $759 million. Europeans living and working in Europe chose to spend in dollars. An ECB working paper in March 2026 called the risk what it is: currency substitution. The digital euro exists partly because ECB officials watched dollar stablecoins move in and decided Europe needed monetary sovereignty back. MiCA exists partly to make sure euro-denominated tokens can compete on fair terms. But the result so far is that the compliant euro product lost 86 percentage points of card market share to the dollar tokens it was meant to displace. The tighter the rules get, the more attractive the alternative looks, and that applies to everything else we covered today as we looked at the issues Europe faces. So unless something dramatically changes, the pattern we've described just keeps grinding. CapEx approved abroad, plants held open in Europe politically rather than economically, and overseeing it all, a political class managing the downfall. But what do you think? Is this the beginning of the end for Europe as we once knew it, or is there still something Europe can do to get out of this? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you want more macro deep dives, just like this one, then you should definitely check out this Finance Bureau video on how China may look better on paper, but faces some existential issues of its own. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon. This is DC, signing